practice is mostly differentiated by I think anything is almost determined by the head of it. And I think having a spiritual foundation for me and realizing that there's only a finite number of things that I can do as a physician to actually accomplish good results. And beyond that, it's in the hand of God. And so I think there's an additional benefit of being able to entrust your care to someone who is favored of God, and someone who believes in and trusts in the healing power of God as well. And so where gifted hands cannot do it, certainly the great physician who can take over and bring about much better results than I can possibly ever dream of doing myself alone.
Wow, that's beautiful. How do you make that transition? I know that I've had physicians on our program before, and one of the topics that we talk about is this God complex. When you are in such a level of power and authority and control in someone's lives, and you are sort of the antidote to bring healing, at least from their perspective, and how you maintain balance in that perspective. How do you balance that, your spirituality and your practice?
Well, God's got a good way of keeping me humble. And it started even long before I even started medical school. One of the things that I tell people when they prepare to go to medical school, I say, if you don't have a spiritual foundation before you come, you better get one soon, because for me at least, I know that I could not have made it through medical school, into medical school, and could not have certainly have excelled through medical school without the intervention of God and without the blessing of God in my life. He's blessed me to be able to have some pretty outstanding accomplishments even during my medical school tenure. I think you may be aware that I have both an MD and a PhD. I have a PhD in pharmacology and cell biophysics, and that's 8 years of medical school on top of the 6 years undergrad, on top of 5 years of residency training afterwards that I did. That's 19 years of training. And if you don't know God before you start all of that, you learn to meet him and you learn to trust in him along the way. And I'll tell you just briefly a couple of instances where I know that in my own strength that I could not have accomplished it. And it seems almost that right before God would open a tremendous door of opportunity or a tremendous blessing on my life, it would be one of the lowest points where it seemed like I could almost do nothing. And I felt so, at some point or another, so incompetent, so unable to do something alone. And then all of a sudden this huge blessing comes and you say, how in the world did you get that? How did you get one of 10 fellowships awarded in the nation? How did you get one of 28 Howard Hughes fellowships that were awarded in the nation? A nobody almost, and someone who's competing against other people with huge credentials that look so much better on paper than mine did at the time. And I know that my own credentials weren't sufficient to get it for me. And it was just simply God opening a door of opportunity. And then once he's opened that door of opportunity, then all of a sudden you look back and you say, well, now all of a sudden I have credentials. But I always am intentional to remember how I got those credentials. I say, I have an MD, I have a PhD, but without my GOD, I'd be absolutely nothing.
I like that. So. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. I know one of the things that kind of resonate when you talk about 19 years of training in the physical field, in the field that you're in terms of a physician, what does that tell you about your relationship with God and that training process? When you describe yourself, what differentiates you is your connection with God. Does it tell you anything? Is there any correlation, particularly in this training ground and relationship with God and preparing you for the things of God and the Spirit of God?
Well, you certainly learn to trust him, and that's what it boiled down to me. Times when I knew that or at least I felt that I would do well and would do well of my own volition, were the times when I met some of my greatest failures. But then there were times when I felt most unable to accomplish a certain thing that I've experienced some of the greatest victories. And so when you get in that place where you recognize that the doors that were open were not because of any of your own doing, it's hard for you to even at that point try to claim credit for it. In fact, I didn't even plan to go into the field of otolaryngology. I thought I would do neurosurgery, cardiothoracic surgery or something. I said I wanted to be at the brain or the heart, some vital organ part. And I said I don't want to be an ear tube and tonsillectomy doctor, you know, because that was beneath me at some point or another. And as I was doing my PhD, I actually did research in the Department of Surgery, and they'd have different residents rotate through the lab who were also in training for surgery. And I remember vividly this one young lady came through. She was not necessarily a saved person. She was not a Christian or anything. But she understood what some of my passions were, particularly my passion for singing, my passion for worship, my passion for serving God. And she said, you don't want to be a thoracic surgeon. You don't want to do neurosurgery. And I thought, why? She said, you just don't want to. You ought to consider otolaryngology. And for the life of me, I said, I don't want to be an ear tube and tonsillectomy doctor. And then later on, after doing a little bit more investigation, I found the broad breadth of things that an ear, nose, and throat surgeon or head and neck surgeon does, and particularly about caring for the voice. And then all of a sudden, the light bulb came on. You said, oh my goodness, now I can see. Because one of my biggest concerns was, how do you, with the demands of medicine, how do you still be actively involved in ministry? How do you still pursue this music ministry that God has given you? How do you still pour into the life of people in your community and help them to grow in their relationship with Christ when your entire schedule is occupied by the treatment of medicine or the administration of medicine and surgery, as those other two careers might have certainly disproportionately consumed so much of my time. And after learning more about it, and particularly voice care, it became immediately obvious to me that this was the path that I was supposed to go. And here's the irony of it is that it didn't come from some super spiritual person. It didn't come from someone who even practiced Christianity at the time. It came from what we would call a quote-unquote sinner. And I'm convinced that sometimes God used broken vessels to bring our refreshment. And sometimes if we are so consumed with the cracks in the vessels that we'll miss our refreshing, our times of refreshing. And at that moment, I was glad that I was able to hear God speaking even through the mouth of a sinner.
Wow, that is beautiful.
Regarding my destiny, how about that?
And that's something, wow, I say it many times, is not necessarily what we do, is what we connect to. And when you connect to the Spirit of God and the wisdom of God, it's already done. It's already completed. All you got to do is just allow and surrender to what has already been done, and then you'll see the full manifestation through that. And we call it the zone, getting in the zone, and fulfilling your purpose, and all these other names they have for it. But really, it's just connection with God. It's just connection with God. You said it so eloquently. One of the things that you brought up that I want to expound on as well is as a musician, and you used the word worship. Are they different?
Oh, I think they're vastly different. My definition of worship, and I coined this from one of my former pastors, John Stevenson. He says, a worshiper is one who is intimately acquainted with and has a daily relationship with God. And I always add to that, and is obedient to the commandments of God, because the Bible clearly tells us that obedience is greater than sacrifice. And in fact, one of the interpretations of, or the interpretation of what worship really is obedience. And you can play music all day long, but if you don't have that obedience to the will of God and to the commandments that He gives on a daily basis, on a moment by moment basis, if we're not obedient to that, we can't call ourselves worshipers. In the Bible, when God told Abraham to go and sacrifice his son Isaac, he told his servants, he said, you wait here while I and the lad, I and my son, we go and worship. He was going up there to sacrifice his only son, well, not his only son, but the son of the seed of promise, the son that God promised him. So the very thing that God had promised and that he had looked for so many years to receive, God told him to sacrifice it. It's that act of obedience is what he was calling and what he recognized as worship. And I believe that's one of the reasons why he's been called the father of faith as well, because we can't obey if we don't have faith in God and faith that God is going to provide everything that we need according to his riches. And so that for me is the essence of what worship is that obedience to the word of God. And so what separates worship music from any other music is that God inhabits that type of music. God is blessed by that type of music. And I believe he said in Exodus, he said, an altar of earth you build unto me, and everywhere you sacrifice on there, every place I record my name, I'll come unto you and bless you. And so I believe that the byproduct of our worship is the blessings of God. It should never become the impetus for our worship, but always the byproduct of it. And just playing music, just singing songs don't bring about that type of byproduct. But worship does in every circumstance, in every instance.
You put it on tape, you put it on CD. What would that do?
You know, I guess if it had to be one thing, I would say that it's God has not forgotten you. And during these tough economic times and uncertain times for a lot of people, it's easy to see how people can get to the place where they feel that their worth is lessened because of their status in this community, status in society. A lot of times we equate our worth with our socioeconomic status, and whether we intentionally do it or unintentionally do it, society does it for us to some degree. And I just really believe that there are so many people out there who genuinely want to be able to be productive members of society, but because of the economy, because of any number of circumstances that are going on with the job layoffs and home foreclosures, there are so many people who feel like their self-worth has been diminished by their ability to either provide for their families, particularly men, to be able to provide for their families, for their children, their spouses. And when you can't do that, you start wondering, especially once you have been a faithful tither, you've been a faithful believer, and you say, God, I've done all of these things in your name. Why is it then that the doors don't seem to be opening for me? And it's easy at that point to think that God has forgotten all the sacrifices that I've made. God has forgotten the commitment that I've made. And I honestly believe that I believe God's words when he says that I reckon that the suffering of this present time is not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed. And if I were to encourage the people who would be listening now to say, God has not forgotten you, he's just preparing some great glory for you on the other side of your tribulation. Dedicate my life as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to you. Let your love and grace abide while your thoughts renew my mind, and I am conformed to be like you.
Wow.